Hello, and welcome to Message in the Middle with Marianne. We all know that life is hard, right? It's messy, it's unpredictable, but it can be wonderful all at the same time. My hope is that we can take a deep dive into self-development topics and explore life's lessons through book clubs, conversations, and interviews. And together, we can uncover the lessons that others have already learned to help us navigate this crazy, wonderful ride called life. Hello and welcome to Message in the Middle. I'm your host, Marianne, and if you've ever felt like your body and your mind were working against you, caught in cycles of stress, anxiety, or exhaustion, I think you'll relate to this episode because we're exploring what it really means to move from fight, flight, or freeze to ease. My guest today is Kelly Hale, and Kelly has spent over 25 years helping people do just that. She's an occupational therapist, restorative movement specialist, and nervous system regulation expert whose work bridges the gap between the brain, body, and gut. But what makes Kelly's story so powerful is how personal it really is. Kelly's journey through chronic health challenges, celiac disease, and fertility struggles gave her a deep appreciation for the wisdom within the body. Now, through her Gutsy Brain Movement method, she teaches others how small, intentional movements and nervous system awareness can create big shifts in how they feel and live. Today, we'll talk about why healing doesn't have to be complicated, how our bodies are always communicating with us, and what it really means to nourish your brain, body, and biome in midlife and beyond. Kelly, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here with your lovely audience.
Well, thank you for joining us. So I mentioned your health challenges, and I suspect that's where it all started for you in this line of work. But can you take us back there and kind of give us the lowdown of what was going on and how you started to explore the connection between nervous system, movement, healing in your own life?
Sure. So we'd have to go all the way back to middle school. Having butt issues, would go to the doctor. There wasn't a lot they'd say, except for back then, don't eat white bread, eat, whole grain bread. Well, that was just feeding into the celiac that they didn't know to look at. And I had some really embarrassing moments with gut issues. And I could tell that story if you would want. But the whole idea is that I lived in a place of shame because I was having issues with bowel movements. Nobody talks about pooping. And yet now my middle school self would look at me and say, oh my goodness, you are affectionately called the poop whisperer. How horrifying, how embarrassing. And I am proud of that because no one talks about bodily functions. And if you could see in my studio, I have a stuffed intestine that we call Colette. We had a contest to name her Colette the colon. We have embarrassment from the movie Inside Out 2, because I talk to people about all systems, bodily functions, GI system. And so early on, I remember thinking, I never want to feel like this, the embarrassment and shame. I never want anyone else to feel like this. And this followed me through young adulthood because here I was in college. I went to a small private school where you had to live on campus all 4 years, which meant I was in a dorm all 4 years. And dealing with GI issues and having a community bathroom, that is no fun. You're trying to laugh it off and be like, oh, I just must have eaten something, stomachache, so on and so forth. And then, of course, it followed me through graduate school. And it wasn't until I was in my early 30s that finally, after finding functional medicine and holistic doctors, that someone finally helped me understand the root cause, which was celiac disease. And, my friends were like, oh, I'm so sorry you can't eat gluten. Well, that's not a big deal. I can deal with that. That is within my control. If you're diagnosed with something like cancer or something, that doesn't feel very often like it's within your control. But the gluten issue was the first step, but I had to work on healing my gut and my nervous system because I had lived in fight, flight, freeze, and probably some moments of fawning there too in my younger years, high school, middle school. That was sort of the way I was wired, to be in fight, flight, freeze, always survival mode. But then when you add unpredictable gut issues to it, you're going to just constantly be put back in that survival mode, even when the saber-toothed tiger goes away.
Mm.
So it's the kind of thing where it wasn't until I really learned how connected they are that I could support myself in becoming the healthiest, most optimal version of me I could be, and also help prevent further issues because celiac is autoimmune. And when you have an autoimmune disorder, you are, I think the statistic is around 40 to 50% more likely to develop secondary autoimmune situation. And if I can do anything about it, I'd like to prevent that from happening, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's been such a journey. And I started teaching movement and fitness in high school. And so I was always working with other people as well as working on my situation as well, and constantly studying and then going on to study my undergrads in exercise and health science. And then knew I wanted to work with people that were having challenges. So I went into occupational therapy. And of course, the learning never stops. I tell the students that I work with that are coming to learn about this profession, I say, the day you graduate is the day the learning really starts.
Ah,
So
yes.
get ready. And if you're not in that frame of mind, you might not want to be in a profession like this because it's constantly evolving and changing, as so we should be also.
Mm. When you said they call you the poop whisperer,
Yes.
I wasn't. I wasn't planning to ask you this question, but I'm thinking about something I just read. Another guest, Sarah Stenton, who she's a bit of a comedian, and she talks about menopause and midlife, and she's always talking about gas in midlife and how much gas women tend to have in midlife. Is that a real thing?
Yes.
Like, is that, it's not just a one-off. It happens to many women?
Yes. So let's talk about gas in midlife. I'm here for it, Marianne, because no one's talking about this. And I mean, I have a teenage daughter and she'll roll her eyes because I talk about this all the time. And I'll tell her, on the way to school, I'll say things like, I want you to know this happens when women start to get in their 40s and 50s. I hope I'm around when you hit that stage. But if I'm not, I want you to know this now because I don't want you to worry. This is something that happens, but don't accept it. You can work on this. So, midlife gas, I talk to a lot of women about this. Sometimes men, but women are more in need of a discussion. We need community as women. We need to feel support, not just one healthcare provider that maybe is dismissive about it, right? That happens, unfortunately, a lot. But so the midlife gas situation, a couple of things. First of all, I think we're more ready to accept that it's part of life and let it happen. Like, personal side story, in college, I dated a guy and I was dealing with all those GI issues and we dated for several years. So he became aware of it. And he's like, I think you're just gassy. You just need to let go and fart. And I was like, that's kind of interesting. Like, he was giving me permission to pass gas. Right. And so that was I still sometimes think about that. And obviously I am not dating him. I went on to marry someone else, but I'm like, okay, so we need to let that happen. Our body's asking us to let that expel because it's not serving us, right? Now, the other thing is a lot of women talk to me about having issues with gas that they can't control. Like in their public setting, they say, oh my gosh, a little something snuck out. I don't think anyone heard it. And I'm like, you know what? We're all human, but let's talk about pelvic floor. And I don't mean just around the vaginal opening. I mean the whole pelvic floor, because what women realize in midlife, peri and postmenopausal and during the menopausal phase, is that their pelvic floor takes on different sensations, different levels of control. And so we do want to work on pelvic floor health. And I work on that a lot in my gut programs because that's sort of the missing piece very often is the pelvic floor piece. And then also gas in midlife too can be, we're not digesting the same. And gas isn't always about needing to toot toot, right? Gas can be those upper gas GI pains that have us doubled over in pain. And that is no fun, right? And sometimes we just have to continue to go to work and show up even when we have that situation. But what's happening as our hormones change is our ability to take in certain foods and digest certain foods changes. For example, I've never been someone who drinks a lot, but if I have half a drink of alcohol, a cocktail or something, it affects me so much differently than when I was younger. And I sense, and I have a good sense of my body, that it's more of the sugar than actually the alcohol.
Mm.
The sugary drinks. I would never have like, what is it, vodka on ice or whatever people drink that's like straight up like
Yeah, on the
that.
rocks.
It would
Yeah.
be less, yeah, on the rocks. Exactly. Thank you. That's how illiterate I am about this stuff. But I would like a cocktail with like elderberry. I like more craft cocktails. But even then, the sugar, I can't tolerate it. And as our estrogen shifts, we become less insulin sensitive. We are less able to tolerate sugar in certain ways. And that's why, we talk about how to eat in a way that allows us to eat and not have our blood sugar spiking all over the place, right? And that's very important in midlife as our hormones are shifting. But the gas changes, again, I talk to a lot of women about it. I teach hands-on visceral organ techniques. One of the trainings I have that I love is when people are here in person, they can be on my table and we'll do hands-on work. It feels almost like cranial sacral or myofascial work, but it's organ specific. And it helps. I get all these texts all the time with poop emojis because another situation that happens is we're just going there, right? Another situation, a lot of women feel a shift in their regularity. And so, whether they're dealing with constipation or the other end of the spectrum, the gut feels raw. And so we can do some hands-on techniques, but because I can't serve all the people that want to get in one-on-one, in my virtual classes, I teach ways for people to do hands-on work and calm the gut. We really do need to think of meditations for our gut. I know that sounds crazy, but we need to help calm the gut. So I hope that answers your question. I kind of went off in a tangent there, but I love, love, love talking about this because no one else is talking about bodily functions like this, and we need to.
I agree. And no, it does answer my question, but it leads me to another because I think you talk about self-regulation a lot and that the
Mhm.
body has an innate capability to self-regulate. What does that really mean? What does that really look like?
Ooh, I love this question. Okay, so we have innate abilities, and the type of nervous system regulation that I do is unique in that we go back to early, early development. That's occupational therapists, really are specialists in development through the lifespan. And so a lot of times nervous system regulation, and I love, love, love that it's becoming more of a household word and people are talking about it. I mean, there's lots of programs, your bank's talking about your nervous system regulation, which is awesome. But a lot of programs are saying do these breathing exercises and you'll regulate your nervous system. But here's something to think about. If you have certain reflexes, like the Moro reflex, no quiz on that later, but if that reflex is not integrated in the background doing what it should do, then you do some breathing exercises, you might feel more agitated. I cannot tell you how many people reach out to me and say, "Oh my gosh, I'm so glad I found this approach because when I do breathing exercises, I feel worse." And I'm like, yes, because you haven't
Hmm.
integrated parts of your nervous system. So, going back to early development, when we are babies, and you shared with me, which I loved before we started, that you have grandbabies, which is so awesome. And when you look at the newest ones that arrive on the scene, they're moving and their movement isn't really planned, right? It's planned from the nervous system side. The nervous system says, I'm going to have the baby move their head like this because this is how they find their center, right? And a lot of times parents will think, oh, they're looking at me and I just smile and nod. And I'm thinking, oh, that's a reflex that's causing them to turn their head and keep them moving. Now, because we grew up in an era where we played outside, we didn't have screens, we likely integrated, worked through all of this and built the scaffolding for our nervous system to function with ease and to learn with ease.
Hmm.
But life, stress, trauma, illness, car accidents can trip it up. And so, like, for example, when anyone goes in for even a small elective surgery, I'm like, okay, afterwards, we are going to want to go back through these reflexes so your nervous system is grounded. Or I work with a lot of dancers and athletes, and they continually have injuries, but they're healthy young people. We're thinking, what's going on? Very often, some of those initial developmental patterns and movements got tripped up.
Hmm.
So when we talk about the innate ability we have within us, it truly is there, but we have to very often go back and repattern so that we can find the ease. It's, and in my one-to-one practice, I will test people's reflexes, but because I do so much work virtually, I will invite people. Like I'm going to teach a class here when we're done. And these lovely people want to work on strength training for their upper body. Well, guess what? We're going to prime the nervous system by engaging some of the reflexes that are most tied to upper mid spine and their arms so that when they go to do strength training, and these are all midlife and beyond women, they're not irritating that shoulder issue. They're not triggering that old injury that picks up when they try to revisit strength training and get frustrated.
That definitely answers the question. I guess what it leads me to wonder, though, is how do you identify them? I mean, if somebody wasn't working with you, can people identify these themselves? Are they things that we all should know? Because I can't name them. So is this something that, most people don't know? How does that work?
Oh my gosh, I love this question. And I just want to pause and acknowledge that you said, I wonder. I honestly feel that to stay youthful, we need to stay connected to wonder and awe.
Mm.
And there's so much to wonder about with our amazing bodies. You're absolutely right. The average bear does not have this understanding. And maybe they haven't found someone in their area like me. It's kind of hard to find people that do the unique synergy of work. And maybe they're not accessing, the work in some of the virtual programs. So here's what I would say. If you want to nourish your nervous system, lessen your time on your screen, and move. One of the simplest ways you can do this and support some of these. And granted, you might start to get curious and then start to do some research and talk to professionals trained in this. The challenge is that most OTs that are trained in earliest developmental repatterning very often work with children. I do work with young people, usually high school, late middle school, but mostly adults. So I'm unique in that I'm supporting adults at looking at this. And very often, the doctors will say, oh, they're just falling because of the aging process. I'm like, no. Something's tripped up. So let's get to the root cause. But back to your question, if someone doesn't have access, the number one thing you can do is walk because you're going to nourish something called the gait reflex. And it's going to keep your body, your brain in a place of automaticity.
Mm.
As we age, sometimes things aren't as automatic. So we want to walk. Now, if we could add to that, I would say, I just happen to have a highlighter right here. I am going to invite them to hold a highlighter in both hands as they're walking. Because what this is going to do, this is going to nourish something called the Robinson hand grasp. It's going to relax the jaw. A lot of us are holding tension there. It's going to nourish the upper body, and it's tied to mental health as well. As long as we don't want someone to hold on, there's faulty grasps that we can do, but you want to wrap your four fingers around and then take the thumb and wrap it over top. So it's kind of a traditional grasp. We're not gripping for dear life. We're grasping for reintegration.
Wow.
I'm all about the simple tips. And I once did a challenge called the Gutsy Brain Challenge. And the Brain Gut Strut. Sometimes I have to think about the different names. And it was about tying your brain into something as simple as walking. So if someone doesn't have access, walk. The other thing is, again, limit your screen time because those nervous system situations, the reflexes are getting tripped up by too much screen time. And especially, wear your blue light glasses if you can. And then also try to dial down the screen time before bed, at least for an hour before bed. That's when I decide to work on laundry. Sometimes I have to be on the screen because I got to see if there's a hiccup that came in my schedule or whatnot. But I'm really trying to reserve that time for like dishwashing that I make into a meditation or laundry that I make into a meditation because it takes me off the screen. But also doing things that are cross body, meaning opposite arm and leg. So you could do an opposite arm and leg movement. You could do reaching across and do a cross crawl. The cross crawl is something that a lot of people talk about in nervous system regulation. And yet there's so much you can do with it. It's a simple move, and doing the cross crawl can start to help nourish and reintegrate some of those reflexes. If you have a big disconnect, like let's say you were in a car accident and several of your reflexes were turned off, it's not going to turn all those back on, but it can help to start your system finding a place where it's not struggling to find its footing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. Well, and when you talk about nervous system regulation, I feel like a lot of times you hear so many women say they're constantly on edge. They feel like they're totally stressed out. They're just so much going on. But I don't know if we necessarily recognize that we're stuck in this fight or flight mode. How would you tell somebody to sort of take an assessment of that? Are you just kind of quote unquote normally stressed, or are you really like, is this a pattern that you need to break out of? Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. This is a fantastic question. And just to clarify, you're asking for so many women who are dealing with stress. How do we know if we're in sort of everyday stress or we've taken it up a notch? Well, here's the thing. The sad thing is most women are living in chronic stress. They're stretched so thin, their bandwidth is just overloaded, the mental load. I talk about that a lot with the women I serve and also with my girlfriends. The other day I declared to my family on a weekend day, I said, I'm on a not leaving the house day. I'm staying home because I Uber mom a lot or I'm just running around a lot. And they wanted me to go to the cell phone store and get like a family shift in our plan. I go, you guys go, I'm staying here. I'm not stepping foot out of the house. I had to really stick to that. But point being, we are so overloaded and society has us thinking that we should always be accessible and available.
Yeah.
And women kind of took that load. It's almost a generational, it's not a gift, it's a trauma that our mothers and grandmothers gave us. You should sacrifice yourself and give to your family and your community at the, sacrifice of yourself. But now, because of the virtual world, that has gone to the nth degree.
Yeah.
And people are going beyond that. So I think most people are beyond everyday stress. They're in chronic stress. And then the question is, how do we know we are in that fight, flight, freeze?
Yeah.
So the thing is, we can feel irritable. Our frustration tolerance goes down. And then add to that midlife hormonal shifts.
Yeah.
So you've got a recipe for major in decrease in frustration tolerance, right? And we feel irritable even with ourselves. Sleep is a challenge. Focus is a challenge. Staying focused. I work with so many women in their even late 30s and beyond that say, I can't even read a book anymore. I can't focus. And this is that chronic underlying stress, digestive issues, sleep issues. So there's so many different ways. And if I work with someone in person, I'm going to actually test out the top reflexes that are tied to fight, flight, freeze. So obviously, if you're not working with a practitioner, even when I work with people virtually, we are not going to be able to test them. I can invite them to notice and say, okay, when we do this movement, what comes up for you? And really invite people to become trained in noticing. And then what we'll do is we'll move through some of those movements that are tied to fight, flight, freeze. So I mentioned earlier the Moro, M-O-R-O reflex that's tied to breath. That is one of those top fight, flight, freeze reflexes. And it's a great movement that feels so great for your spine. I mean, if I could describe it for your listeners, you would be in standing, turning your legs out, make goalpost arms or cactus arms, depends on if you're a plant lover or a sports lover. And then you're going to arch your back, lift your chin, look up with your eyes, hold that for at least 6 seconds. And then you'll round in, your knees come together, your arms cross your chest, your spine round, your chin tucks. And you hold that position for 6 to 8 seconds and you go back and forth, ideally finishing in the cacti or goalpost. I have tons of videos of those on my free channels and whatnot. So those types of movements, I always joke, I failed at meditation. I would try to sit in meditation and my mind would not shut down or I would fall asleep. And I've got some stories about falling asleep and snoring in meditation experiences. So, it was either going 150 miles per hour or sleeping and crashing into sleep. But what I had to do, I realized that the way I'm wired, I didn't at that time, I can do it now, didn't resonate with sitting in stillness because my nervous system, and a lot of people raise their hand real high on that, right?
Yeah.
You're in like company. And so what I said is, well, gosh darn it, I want the benefits of meditation. Why can't I do this? I had this whole dialogue, beating myself up. And so then I decided rather than berating myself, I would meet myself where I was at, like I do for the clients that I've served all these years. And I said, well, what helps me to feel relaxed? what helps me to feel good? It's movement. I've always loved movement. And so I wanted a moving meditation, but I didn't really find one. I was already trained in Pilates and I'm like, yes, Pilates feels good, but it's missing a little something for me. And my Pilates friends might come after me for that. But I still love Pilates, but I layer the development into it so it can be reorganizing, can be a little bit differently meditative. So what I did is I had to go out there and create a system of moving meditation, which brings in Pilates, brain gym, GYM, like gymnasium exercises, brings in developmental movements. And then after I did that, I could sit in stillness for 5 or 10 minutes. Now I could sit for 30 minutes in a seated meditation and not drive myself crazy because I've learned how to work with my nervous system instead of against it. I was so good at just like push, push, push against my nervous system until I learned how to really pause and understand what it needs. And it's so simple. You don't have to do a vigorous hot yoga class. You can do simple movements that are accessible to most people. I've even gone into the ICU and done cross-body movements with people that had a stroke and couldn't use one side of their body.
Wow.
So this work, and that's what I love. I'm all about accessibility because I want everyone to feel like they have access. Everyone has a nervous system, so everyone should be given the opportunity to learn how to work with it instead of against it.
I love that thought. You said something about when you're working with people to test their reflexes, one of the things you're doing is sort of, if you're working with somebody virtual, you're training them to pick up on the signs and notice things. But it made me think that for so many years, back to the woman who is so overworked and so stressed out, we sort of train ourselves not to pay attention to our body, not to listen to the signals. We're too busy. We're too busy to slow down. We're too busy to feel a pain. We're too busy to whatever, right? How do you start getting people to tune back into that, to trust that after all the years of training yourself not to trust it?
I love your insight. So, so important. And really, it is a practice of learning, noticing. And I think also a big part of what I love supporting women with is acknowledging, validating, and moving through emotions. And I was just having this conversation with someone the other day. As little girls, we were taught, at least in my upbringing, being angry isn't ladylike. Being angry, you just go out there and put on your smile and do your best and just shove down those emotions. So most women never given permission to feel, right? So a lot of times it can take women years to actually feel until they start to learn some of these techniques. And a lot of mental health therapists refer their clients to me because they want to help them get more in touch with their body. A lot of us have disconnected from our body, even if there's not like a full disassociation. And so what I help people do is literally move through emotions. One of my offerings in my membership is called Emotions in Motion. And it's 10 minutes, because who's got an hour?
I love that.
To stop in their day and process emotions, right? So there are certain movements that are tied to the stress and the old trauma. So moving my right arm and right leg at the same time is tied to stress and trauma, as is a snow angel kind of movement. I'm not saying don't do them. I'm saying do them and acknowledge the stress and the, emotions, and then always come back to cross-body movements. Always, always, always coming back to oppositional midline crossing movements, because that's where the integration and the completion of the cycle. I'm not saying it's going to complete 25 years of an emotion, but it starts to help your nervous system practice completing that loop. And then what we do is we tie into certain organs are tied to certain emotions. I mentioned that I'm a visceral manual therapist, and people are often surprised to learn that their liver is tied to anger. And so they don't realize that. And so then we do movements to help mobilize our liver. And it's a step in processing those emotions. And then, the kidneys are tied to anxiety, for example, and depression. And so very often we're doing kidney movements. And that sounds silly, but they're very simple movements again. And we tie them into the other movements. And that goes back to what I was saying earlier. When I thought there was a missing piece to Pilates and yoga, Here's what it was. So I would be teaching a group class and I would see some people were very calm and relaxed after a Pilates class, and some people were ungrounded and maybe a little bit revved up in a way that didn't serve them well, let's say. What was happening before I really understood how to tie in these developmental movements is perhaps we were ending with movements that weren't cross body,
Mm.
that were not crossing the midline, that brings you back to that grounded, centered place. And so I think that Pilates and yoga can be wonderful modalities, but let's be mindful. And when I'm training other professionals, I'm always saying, if you do nothing else, end your classes, your sessions with cross body movements.
Mm. I'm curious what you would say to the person that is listening but not quite believing. And why I say that is, so some of it crosses a little bit from the logically we know this is a fact to sort of like a little out there when we start talking about the organs in the body and holding emotions, and you're smiling for those, that can't see. You're smiling because you've heard this before, I'm sure. But also the stress. We often think of stress as something in your head. Yeah, you're just stressed out. It's in your mind. It's not in your body. Talk to us about some of that, because I want everybody listening to have an opportunity to really believe and understand, and if it's a fit for them, look into it more to help them. But I want to get past that initial reaction.
Oh, yeah. And I think that's very valid. I always meet people where they're at, and I always consider my audience. If I'm working with someone, whether it's by the time that someone's in my membership, they're usually curious about the organ piece of it.
Yeah.
But in one-on-one, I may not bring the organ piece into it for people because they're not ready for it. And that's okay. We want them to feel safe and comfortable. That's part of nervous system regulation. But when you look at the organ work, what it's really tied to is more of the Chinese medicine, the acupressure points. I refer a lot of people to acupuncture. One of my best friends is an acupuncturist. So it's tied to that. And one of the areas of study that I started with Tai Chi, which I love. But then I went into Qigong because the organ work really resonated with me. And so if you look at Qigong and Tai Chi, and you look at the cultures that practice that a lot, their elders aren't falling as much. Their elders
Yeah.
have better brain capacity. So I can't name a study right now per se, but when you look at, and there's balance and there's crossing the midline, that's what first drew me to Tai Chi was, oh, they're crossing the midline. And then when I learned about the organ piece of Qigong, and because I come from a gut place where my organs were just a wreck, I was drawn to Qigong. So if you think of it in terms of some of those ancient practices like Qigong and Tai Chi, it might make it a little bit more comfortable for people. And again, there is research out there, and I'm not going to be able to quote an exact study right now, but and you're absolutely right. Like a lot of the people I see, their traditional healthcare doctor might say, well, I don't really know about that organ stuff. And the hands-on organ work was started by the amazing osteopathic doctors, many of whom now practice in more traditional ways, which is great if that's their area of focus. But some of them still do the hands-on work, working with the body. And so it comes from that. So there is a long history of it. But absolutely, someone may not be as comfortable with looking at the organ pieces or saying, oh my gosh, my anger is not in my liver. But here's the thing that I think most people would agree with. They feel their stress in their mind, but it shows up in their body. Like the woman who comes in and says, my upper traps are so tense because I just have been dealing with this major situation at work. The gentleman that comes in and says, my low back is in knots because we're closing this big deal at work. And that's sort of their vulnerable point
Yeah.
to have the stress show up. So there's a very simple example of the brain and the body working together. And a lot of times people will be sent to me because they've tried everything else for unabating back pain or shoulder pain. And then they want to try something. And when you get to that point, very often you're going to be more open to saying, oh, maybe I need to do some kidney exercises and that's going to put some relief on my low back. Oh my gosh, yes. Or maybe for my shoulder, I need to do some early developmental movements because I didn't fully crawl and my body's been compensating my whole lifetime. Like my husband didn't really cross. We're always talking about this at my house. My poor daughter, she's like, the conversations we have. Dad not crawling years ago. We have these sorts of conversations, but it does show up in the way, it shows up in different ways for different people. But sometimes we need to go back to earliest development. You'll hear of a lot of people doing inner child work. That's not my thing, but we'll go back to childlike movement and wonder, because that's where we can find a lot of freedom for our brain and our body.
I love when you were saying that people come to you, they're often a little more open-minded because they're looking for a solution. And it made me think of, so many years ago, I went to an acupuncturist. I had really bad sciatica. I used to be much heavier. I had really bad sciatica that would act up and nothing would help solve it. So somebody suggested go see an acupuncturist. And I was like, that's not going to help. I mean, how can some guy poking needles, it was a guy, poking needles at me do something to help this, awful situation? So fortunately, the guy I went to, he had such a great sense of humor. And I went in there and we had a great rapport, and I'd be like, it did work, by the way. And so every time I'd go see him, I'd walk in and I'd be like, all right, do your voodoo stuff and get me better, right? And he would laugh. He could take it with a grain of salt, but it really worked. And I guess to your point, if you're curious and you are at a point where you need to try something else, what's it going to hurt? Try something and see if it helps. But it really did work. And it still boggles my mind how I could go in there and I'd say, a certain spot was hurting, and he'd poke in a completely different spot, like, on my foot, or I'm just making it as an example, but totally unrelated, yet it would fix that spot. So I personally buy into this stuff, but it took me a bit to get there. So I still think it's a little voodoo-ish, but it does work. It does work. So,
well, and that's the thing, when you get to a point where you're in such a state of struggle, the struggle bus is no fun, and you're riding that struggle bus and you go, okay, I'm willing to be open-minded and try it.
Yeah.
And granted, again, when I'm working with individuals, I really check in and notice what their comfort level might be. And then in my group offerings, my virtual offerings, most people show up, they're curious. And so they might not go to the part about the organ work right away. But recently I asked my members in my Gutsy Brain Movement membership, I said, okay, for next month's Emotions in Motion, do you want to do hands-on, self-directed, guided organ work, or do you want to do this particular movement sequence? And this group loves movement. Like, we do a lot of movement together. And they were all, hands down, the survey came back that they wanted to do the organ stuff. And I was like, wow, okay. So I was actually thinking it was going to go in a totally different direction, but they were there for it. And I think, there's more and more people talking about the whole idea. I think one of your guests was talking about, the world in therapy, or American therapy. That tells us that there are generations that didn't believe that you would seek out a professional to talk about mental health challenges or stress or whatnot. So the world is open to things like that. And I think people are curious about their body, and they have to do what feels comfortable.
Yeah.
There's certain things in alternative health that I'm not comfortable with, that I won't. And yet I'm very open to holistic. So you have to find your comfort level. And when you really start to notice, there's that noticing opportunity again, really start to notice and check in, your nervous system will tell you, your brain, your body, your heart will tell you. And I mentioned I have a 15-year-old daughter, and she's so fun. And she'll say to me, Mommy, that's dysregulating my nervous system. And she's poking fun at me. And I'll go, I'm here for it. I'm here for it. But I'll say, all kidding aside, remember, you get to decide if something feels right to you or not. Okay. So we can joke about this, but when you really tune in, I've always told her since she was little, and this is from a great author, Chick Morgan, check it out inside. Check it out inside, like trying to empower her to make her own decisions and become empowered instead of always looking to an adult or another person to make a decision. And I think a lot of women I've taught a lot of classes and workshops on giving women permission to set boundaries, to take time for themselves, to look outside a traditional path of career, or, balancing family life and career, which I really don't think is balance. I always call it harmonizing, because balance is difficult. But can we give ourselves permission, or are we waiting for someone else?
Mm-hmm.
Very often they're waiting for someone else, but part of the work I love to do is to empower women to learn to empower themselves.
I love that. I love that. So, so true. Well, I want to make sure before we go, you've alluded to it a few times, but let's talk a little bit about your Gutsy Brain Movement. Like, what exactly is this thing you've created? What are you really targeting when you're working with folks?
Yeah, thank you for asking. So, the Gutsy Brain Movement is my compilation of movement that supports your brain and body. Like, why should we do a movement experience to build our strength, core stability, and then separate it and do a meditation and brain movement or brain exercise? So, Gutsy Brain Movement is really about bringing it all together. And I call it Gutsy Brain Movement, mostly women. There's one guy in there right now, and men are welcome, but it's mostly women. And they're pretty gutsy. They've met challenges in their life, whether it be, loss of someone close, or loss of a role in their life, or dealing with huge health challenges like cancer or what have you. These are really gutsy women. And we're going to move in mindful ways and use our brain. And so within this membership, which is what I created because I guess my colleagues tell me I'm fortunate to have had a wait list for many years for my one-on-ones, but I didn't like that because I couldn't reach the people that needed the unique work. So, not really knowing about anything virtually, I set up the Gutsy Brain Movement membership. And we do, when we're done, I'm going to get ready to teach here soon after a work in. I always say, why work out when you can work in? Because working out changes bodies, whereas working in changes lives. What that
Mm,
means is we're going to move, we're going to warm up our brain and our body with nervous system regulation movements. We're going to do strengthening in a way that honors the body after, 40 that needs some extra support, and go back through some of those developmental movements. And the gut piece comes in because sometimes we're doing exercises with a small ball that helps to release some of that tension in the gut. And then we also have within that membership, we have something called the gut recharge, which we do once a month, which is mostly movement for gut health. But sometimes we're talking about hands-on techniques like abdominal massage to release tension that we do for ourselves. And then there's also a 40-minute moving meditation that we call Ease Embodied. And then we have that 10-minute emotions in motion. So there's a quickie because who has time to always do a 60-minute? We have a few 60-minute offerings in there, but it's 10 minutes, 30 to 40 minutes, and then a few 60 minutes so that it meets everyone where they're at in their life as it is. And
I love that.
it's really a wonderful group of people that continually inspire me. And it's a way to help the work reach beyond my little corner of the world.
I love that. Well, this has been fascinating. I think we could probably talk for 17 hours, but I like to always leave the show with a single message. So if you could only leave one message, what would it be?
I love this so much. And really, what I would love for people to know is that it doesn't take fancy equipment. I mean, I've got all the Pilates apparatus over here, which I'm very fortunate to have. It doesn't take the pills and the powders. Everything you need is within you. And simple movements that are accessible and comfortable, no matter what challenge you're dealing with, can help you come home to yourself, to find the safety within yourself.
Mm. Well, thank you for sharing and being with us today. And where should we direct people to find you? Where are you most active? It sounds like your Facebook group is a very active place for you. Is that where folks should look you up?
Great place because you can also learn from other people and their journey. And that's nervous system regulation with Kelly Hale. It's a small but engaged and supportive group. And when you look into that, you'll also learn about, I have a freebie called Inner Peace. And that's 3 short videos that teach you some hands-on, some movements that will just help you start to move towards that calmer, more organized nervous system. And you can get that at inspiredwell.com/inner peace. But I think your point is very valid. The Facebook group is a dynamic moving rather than just receiving some videos. You get to actually, I go live in there every Monday and do a brain body biome inspo. And a lot of times people's questions and needs will inform what I choose for a topic.
Mm. Well, and you also said I'm not sure if this is for everybody or just for your community, but you also said you have a very active email distribution
Oh,
with
yeah,
videos and stuff. Is that open to everybody?
absolutely.
Okay, good.
Everyone. Thank you for pointing that out. So, what happens is every week in my Facebook group, I introduce one super simple exercise, but I talk more about why you want to explore it. Like yesterday, we did one for supporting the back and in a standing position. So you can do it in the kitchen if you're prepping a meal, a holiday meal, whatever, or if you're at your desk and you can't roll out the mat and get on the floor in your office. So super simple. Then what happens is they have a week to kind of think about it, play with it, or maybe they're catching the replay. And then almost a week later, in their inbox, I send a video that takes that one exercise and maybe adds one, two, three more exercises. So it becomes a little flow. And then those show up on my vlog so that they don't have to be looking for emails every week, going back and finding it. But a lot of people tell me that they're doing those, and it's absolutely free videos because it helps them just in 4 minutes or less, literally. Sometimes it might go to 6 minutes, but gives them a tool to inform their body, their nervous system, so that they can be organized and feel good both in their joints and in their structure, but also in their mind.
And I like that it's a way to introduce people to the work you're doing, and it's accessible to everybody. So that's great.
The easiest way to probably get into that sort of newsletter vlog is through the Inner Peace freebie that people can get into. Or when you hop into the Facebook group, there's a couple of questions that ask you if you'd like to receive it, and then we send it to you. So yeah.
Sounds good. And we'll put as many links as we can to get them to the right places in the show notes for all of this as well. So thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a great conversation.
I loved it. Thank you so much.
You are very welcome. Thanks so much for listening to today's episode of Message in the Middle. I hope you found something in this conversation that reminded you that you're not alone and that midlife isn't about winding down. It's about waking up. You're not done. You're just becoming. If this episode speaks to you at all, please share it with a friend who needs to hear it. And if you're enjoying the show, I'd be so grateful if you could take a moment to leave a review. It really helps other women find this community and this podcast. Until next time, take care of yourself.